Hey there. Welcome to Variance Betting. My name is Ted Knutson. I'm a professional sports bettor. So far this season, we have won $5,000 or more on the English Premier League, English Championship, and UEFA Champions League betting. We are now at 400 subscribers on the Variance Betting newsletter premium subscription. And so that's our stake size this week, 400 a bet. We were 200 up till Christmas time. We've been growing really fast. We've been on a killer winning streak. This week, I'm going to cover my English Premier League bets. If you want to see the championship bets, or if you want to see Champions League bets in a couple of weeks, check on that and subscribe to the premium newsletter. But in the meantime, let's go. It's really exciting to be able to bring people winning bets as they've done over the course of the season. And that's been fabulous. If you're not a subscriber to the Variance Betting premium subscription on the Transfer Flow, please sign up. You can find all the info in the show notes. But one of the things we've been able to do is find a partner that's doing some of the coolest promos in the world. And this week, once again, from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. UK time, usually that's when they do it on Fridays. So if you're seeing this late, but you want to get involved, you can check it out on Fridays. They are doing -103, -103, or 1.97, 1.97 prices on all of the English Premier League lines. This is world's best pricing. Please follow the link in the show notes below to sign up if you haven't got an account. There's information for you there as well. And there's a second promo that they wanted us to tell you about. So if you're not familiar with Bet105, they're for winning players, which obviously really matters because we've got winning picks over here. They're reduced juice bookie. We've talked last week about how important discount bookies are versus bonus-based bookies. No rollover requirements. Withdrawal times are great. But they've got another promo. So not this weekend, but next weekend is the Super Bowl. And they wanted us to let you know that they are running even better than -103, -103. They got 102, 102 pricing on the Super Bowl. That will start next weekend. The details are it's on the point spread and money line. The limits are 25,000 per bet and 50,000 per event. And it's running from Friday, 10 a.m. I think that's US time, to kick off on Sunday. So crazy, crazy Super Bowl promo. It's a different thing than the soccer stuff that we've been running, but they are a worldwide bookie, and they just wanted us to let you guys know if you wanted some Super Bowl action, they're giving you the best price in the world. Right. Tucking into the game analysis for this weekend. This weekend, we've got 5 Premier League picks, which is about normal. I think usually I have picks on almost half the games, and it's been a tricky time. There's 1 or 2 of these games that I was looking at, and teams are getting less injured, which is kind of funny. Throughout the whole Christmas period, teams were overwhelmingly injured, and you had to pilot all of the different permutations of who's really injured and it's going to affect their performance, and who's only sort of injured. And it I mean, Arsenal for a long time felt like they were sort of injured, but they couldn't quite figure out who was going to be in from a game to game basis. Anyway, Forest are one of the teams that have been lucky enough not to be injured for the entire season. Really, they've had the fewest games lost to injury over that period of time. And then we have them facing Brighton. Forest are at home in this game once again. We are on Nottingham Forest, and I do really like this one on the 0. I like it a little less if it moves to the quarter, and it's kind of split between those 2 numbers here. So some bookies might have it on a quarter. If you bet Nottingham Forest at -0.25, or what we call a quarter goal, you will, if they win, obviously you win that outright. If they draw, you would lose half of your bet, and the other half would be returned to you because a draw would be a push in that case. On a 0, or in the US, they sort of call it a pick'em. This would be a draw no bet line, is what it's called across most of the rest of the world. On a 0, anyway, then if it draws, you get your money back and nothing happens. Anyway, at a draw no bet, we like Forest here at this price. I think that even on the quarter goal, I'm pretty okay with that. So that's what we're looking at this weekend. I really like Brighton, but Brighton haven't been excellent since basically the first 8 matches of the season. They are getting healthier, but they still haven't proven that they can have a sustained output of really good play. And until they do, you're not happy to sort of back them unless the lines are quite off. Speaking of lines that are quite off, the next match on the card is Bournemouth versus Liverpool. Now, Bournemouth have been quite punchy. They're very difficult to play against. They have had injuries, but they're the one team in the league that the injuries haven't seemed to matter too much. And Irola's team have been excellent against basically every team that they faced. I think they beat Forest last weekend 5-0, which is a pretty good performance. But also, we don't expect Liverpool to defend quite as poorly as Forest did last weekend. Liverpool came off of a midweek, but they rested basically everybody, which is what they should have done. So they rested everybody on the midweek. Obviously, they qualified at the top of the Champions League, but this is still an away match against a very good team, and it's not like old Bournemouth from last year where you could expect this to be like a one and you probably leave it alone. At 0.75 this season, you're like, okay, there's a lot of value in that line. So we're betting Bournemouth at plus 0.75, which means that if Liverpool win by 1 goal, you would get half of your money back. If Liverpool win by 2 goals or more, then you lose your whole bet. If Bournemouth draw or it's a Bournemouth win, then you win your whole stake on that. Bournemouth have been a team that we've been able to sort of be on pretty consistently throughout the year. I was a bit of a jinx for them whenever I bet on them early in the season, but they've definitely been a team that has surprised a lot. And the models can't quite incorporate their more recent term history versus their longer term. At some point, we should probably talk about how much the historic elements of building gambling models sometimes will throw you off when you see big systemic problems happen in the league. Like effectively, when everybody has the same amount of money and you're seeing Spurs and Man United on the downslope, and then you see other teams on the upswing, and they could be a sustained amount of upswing, it's hard to say, then those leagues actually become kind of more fun to bet on outside of the model numbers, because the models just don't quite have the ability to adjust as quickly as humans do. Now, a lot of times humans are perceiving things that don't need adjustments, and that's where being an expert gambler comes in. And having done this for a long time, I've had a pretty good run of being able to do this, particularly in the Championship, which is actually a more volatile league. Traditionally, the Premier League has been quite stable over the last 20 years, but we're seeing much more instability over particularly the last 5 seasons. We see lots of the big teams struggling more. Some teams that had never been relegated before were relegated, like an Aston Villa used to finish in the European slots regularly back when I was trading that league. And then obviously you get like the Manchester Uniteds who, are struggling for multiple seasons in ways that we've never seen before. Somebody has to take their place. And in this case, a team like Bournemouth have been very successful at that and may stay there for a while. Moving right along, we've got Newcastle versus Fulham. So Newcastle have had a really good run of health, and their starting 11 are pretty good. And I think, Fulham are a lot like Forest in that they play a slower style meant to jam up the game in the middle of the park. Hopefully you're able to take advantage of some opponent mistakes, maybe some fatigue. I think Forest in particular are better at being successful off of set pieces, which has given them more success in matches this year. Fulham are like the slightly worse version of Forest. And they're going up to Newcastle, who are really good when their starting 11 is healthy. I don't want anything to do with the handicap on this one, but given what I just said about Fulham and the style that they play and how they slow things down a lot, only 3 of Fulham's away matches so far this year, and I think they've been 11, have been over 3 goals, I believe. And so looking at that, I think that there's value in the under 3, especially if you get a good price on it. Basically, what that means is if there are 3 goals exactly, you'll get your money back. It's called a push. If there are 2 goals, 1 goal, or 0 goals in the match, you'll win your bet. And if there are 4 goals or more, you'll lose your bet. So I think there's some advantage in that one. So I'm playing the under on this. Totals are usually a little less advantageous for me. Like you don't have as big of an edge. You're kind of playing either something that that makes it a little bit weird, or if you're part of the bigger gambling syndicate hedge fund, like maybe you've got a really good totals model that you play consistently. You play some of the derivatives off of those, like a team total, which is a combination of the game total, but also a bit of the handicap as well. Anywho, under 3 for that match. Now we get 2 cellar dwellers in Everton versus Leicester. Now, I found it interesting that Everton have made basically 0 moves in this window. I thought that they would have to make some moves in order to stabilize their position outside of the relegation candidates. I think that, Spurs was a match that they were maybe a little lucky. There was an own goal, but obviously people have been beating up on Spurs, so they were able to take advantage of that in Moyes' first game. And then last week there was a penalty in a really dreadful game against Brighton that could have gone either way, and they ground out 2 wins in Moyes' first 2 matches. Maybe they're looking at it and saying, we're far enough out of the toilet bowl that we're not going to worry about being flushed, which is it's a ballsy opinion there, given how weak that squad is, and particularly given how Mangala has come up with an ACL injury and he's out for the year. And then Calvert-Lewin, I think, picked up a hamstring injury this past week as well. So he's gone and not particularly consistently healthy either. Even with all of that, I can't quite bring myself to bet on Leicester. Now you might, and there is a case to be made that says that Leicester might be an okay bet at this handicap. I'm not going to make that. It would be a little aggressive. I certainly, given the injuries, would not be on Everton at the moment, but yeah, that's my take. You guys, obviously, the analysis is done for everybody to be able to do it. That's why I've got the newsletter that I put out, multiple times a week for the last 3 weeks when we've got the Champions League mid rounds. Often there's Championship mid rounds as well. So yeah, leaving that game alone. You do what you want to. Everton has some injury problems again coming into the weekend. Ipswich versus Southampton. This causes me pain because Ipswich are clearly the second worst team in the league. And yet they are outright favorites at home against by far the worst team in the league. And Southampton are not only the worst team in the league, they are dead. They are they were turned to zombies, and then the zombies were killed and burned amounts of dead. They are not staying up in the league. So what that does is in the midweek, I kind of described with the last round of the Champions League in the midweek newsletter, I said, there's a thing called DGF in sort of the professional betting syndicate world that means don't give a fuck games. It's an element that takes into account motivation for whether teams care about their matches or not. Now, in something like the last round of the Champions League, like that can actually significantly matter. Sometimes teams are just playing for pride. Other times it means that the goal totals need to go substantially up, and that might be the case in Southampton's matches for the rest of the season. I haven't looked at that yet, but it's certainly something to be aware of when they're clearly going to be relegated this season. In this case, obviously Ipswich are fighting to stay out, and they've got a good head coach. They seem to be they're live dogs is what we call it. They're not likely to stay up, but they still could. And it only takes a couple of unexpected wins in order to keep them out when you've got, sort of 3 or 4 other teams that are struggling around them. So yeah, we're betting on Ipswich to win this outright. I find myself slightly surprised, but that's what the job's about. The next match here is Wolves versus Aston Villa. Now, when I looked at the handicap here, this looks weird to me because you have a relegation team that's fighting a Champions League team. And not only are they a Champions League team, but they're a Champions League team that made the top 8. So they're getting a one-round bye effectively when people like Manchester City are having to play Real Madrid. So a quarter goal looks small on something like that. But there's 2 things going on. First of all, Villa have not been awesome in the league, right? There's a reason why they're down where they are and not fighting the Champions League places outside of actually in the competition. And also, they had to play their full squad in order to win the match against Celtic outright midweek. And they've been a little tired. They're looking at some potential reinforcements, but also looks like they've sold John Duran to Saudi Arabia. So given all of that, we're going to leave this alone, even if it looks a little bit odd. Wolves have been fairly okay defensively. So yeah, that's my evaluation on that. If you disagree on any of these picks, by the way, and you guys have stuff that you want to toss down into the comments, I'm happy to read it. It's always interesting to see other people's takes. That's one of the things that the gambling world does really well that the football world does not do well, which is effectively to ask questions and to give other opinions. And what it does is it helps you come to a better set of conclusions about your gambling, and listening to other people's opinions, even when coming to your own opinion and your own analysis and your own advice via your own process. You take in outside information to incorporate. It's still very valuable. So anyway, feel free to tell me what you guys are on in the comments there. Always interested to see what people have to say. And, some people are certainly going to be a little more aggressive than I have been this season. And you probably would profit from it because I've been a little cautious in coming back into gambling. That'll probably get more aggressive as we get in the next couple of months before tailoring off to the end of the year when you get a lot of DGF games. But then next year, if, assuming that we're comfortably winners once again, as we are right now, then, there's the space to be a little more aggressive, especially when you feel like you've got good reads on what's going on. Moving on to the Sunday matches. We have Manchester United versus Crystal Palace. Both of these teams are pretty boring. This line is basically in line with what the models said that they were. I don't expect a lot of interesting action in this match. It could happen, but it's not something that I'm going to bet on. I will let other people watch that match as well. I'll just watch the highlights. I don't need to see it. Now, a game that you do need to see, simply because the total is it's not only a total of 3.5 goals, which is a lot. That's the baseline total is 3.5. But it's 3.5 goals with the bias on the over. So they expect to be more than 3.5 goals. Which, given Brentford home matches have been insane most of the season. They've had tons of goals scored. And also, like, every Spurs match seems to have tons of goals scored. Much like earlier in the year when Liverpool faced Spurs, I looked at and I was like, 3.75 could be too low. Like, that's a crazy number, but it's true. 3.5 on this one could be too low. I haven't decided whether I'm not going to bet on it. On the total, Mickey Van de Ven came back midweek for Spurs. It feels like they're a couple weeks away from being healthy enough to potentially start betting on them again as they come out the other side of this horrible injury run. But that's not this week. That's probably like the week after the FA Cup break, or the next FA Cup break. This week, I think that Brentford are probably going to be able to take care of business at home. I think, we're just a little bit early for Spurs to be healthy enough for this to flip it around and make that a valuable bet. And so, we're on the bees again, at home again. But hopefully we win, unlike the Liverpool game where we got Darwin Nunez twice. The big match of the weekend is in North London. It's Arsenal at home versus Manchester City. Now, if you were purely model betting on this one, you might have a good case to bet on the Gunners. Also, if you were betting on like sort of recent form over the last couple of months, you'd still be like, maybe Arsenal are pretty interesting here. I have concerns about that. First of all, I am worried about the combination of Haaland and Marmoush in the City attack. Like, Marmoush gives them lots of other options, and he looked immediately at home with Pep's team last weekend. So that is step one in my concerns about an Arsenal bet for this one. Kusanov, obviously, if he could gift some free goals, that would be very useful for the Gunners. But I don't think you'll see the same level of yips as we saw in match number one. City obviously did have to play a real game against Club Brugge. So that is maybe a little bit in favor, but we're looking at a Sunday evening game there. They got a little bit of extra time to rest up. And the other thing that concerns me here is, I know the schedule's been a little bit soft, but Pep's team hasn't lost a game since before Christmas. That's notable. It's not to say that they're ever controlling anything, but they're getting the job done somehow. And given that was before reinforcements started to come, like, I don't know. I will be rooting for Arsenal because technically I'm an Arsenal fan, although I'm happy to root against them when the money's against them. But in this case, I'm not going to be betting on Arsenal. So if you want to, like, there is a case there for it. Maybe it's the fatigue element. But for me, I look at this. I also look at how they got things done against Chelsea last week. Chelsea should have been done better. If there are problems in that game, that's fine. Raya might be out for this match as well. And Neto did not look comfortable midweek. So, like, there's enough going on here that I would just leave that alone. I would happily watch it. I would be entertained by it. It might be painful to watch, but I'm not going to get involved with my money. And knowing when not to bet, knowing when there's enough uncertainty not to touch something, is one of the most important things in gambling. The Monday night match is Chelsea versus West Ham. And this one's pretty intriguing. I'm going to watch it from the sidelines. I'm not going to bet on either of these teams. 1.5 is a pretty decent sized line, but if this were earlier in the year, like, you would slam dunk bet this on Chelsea. West Ham just were giving up weird goals. They were never organized. They had huge gaps between their midfield line and their back line that teams exploited all the time. Chelsea were one of the best at exploiting this. This go around, different head coach. Graham Potter's involved now. Chelsea have been struggling a lot. Maybe West Ham are the best team to get over this with. I'm not sure. But Chelsea have been struggling a lot. The Sanchez problem is still there. We don't know if he's going to be benched or not. Interesting question. Like, or how good his replacement is, whether they have to do funky contortions to do build up against a not very good team. Then you get the center backs that, they're still struggling, still betting in with Trevor Chalobah. I don't know. Like, I think this line's fine. And metrically, like with the gambling models, like this looks fine as well. So again, another reason not to get involved. So for me, I think there's 5 bets this weekend. A lot of them on the Saturday games. The Sunday games we're mostly watching, except for Brentford. Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting. I've got a few more bets on the English Championship in the variance betting subscription. We've been growing a ton, so thank you so much for the support. It's been great. Obviously, winning helps, but people also like the analysis to sort of craft their own bets, which is an important thing. That's why we keep teaching you stuff. Yeah, so 5 bets, 3 in the champ, maybe another one that has a lineup. We only got 3,400 riding this week, even though we bumped the bet size up to 400. That's because we don't have 9 English Championship games running like we did last time. I know that you're here for the gambling, and that's awesome. But if you're not subscribing to our free newsletter, we have a free newsletter that comes out 5 times a week at thetransferflow.com/subscribe is where it's at. Variance betting is the premium gambling newsletter. I do analysis for the English Premier League, English Championship, and the Champions League. We won midweek in the Champions League, which was really nice. We were basically flat last week across the whole thing, though. We were down small on the weekend. So going again this weekend, as you know, 3,400 in play, but if you haven't subscribed to the free stuff, we've got transfer rumor analysis. We'll have a big kickoff or big recap on Monday on the podcast. And also, presumably, we'll have next week some analysis of the moves that happened and maybe some that didn't, what we learned about the transfer market as well. We also do team analysis, game analysis. We highlight upcoming stars that people want to be aware of. We do this on our social channels as well, which you've seen kind of come up on little chyrons throughout the course of this podcast and this video, if you're watching it there. Yeah, so thank you. I'll catch you guys later, and best of luck this weekend.